shoemaking tools. Some of you might have seen my Instagram called Shoemakers Toolmakers. Some of you might have bought tools from me. So today I'm going to give you a brief history of development of shoemaking tools in the first half of the talk, and then the second half of the talk I'll show you how to clean old tools, restore them for use. In the first part we'll be showing you development of tools from the 18th century to present. Seeming development from file making. I mean, this isn't my sort of theory, but it looks like that's the most probable thing. And then talking a bit about the different types of tools and the different changes in forging technique as well, which sort of influence how they've developed over time. And then in the second part, talking about, as I mentioned earlier, and then a brief Q&A, of course. So this is the earliest document I can find on shoemaking, from 1767. And this was made by Monsieur de Garçon. He wasn't a shoemaker himself. He was part of the Académie des Sciences in Paris, and they were a group of men. This is the Enlightenment period, so it was a period where they were trying to compile all known knowledge into quantifiable books and reading, basically, trying to compile all human knowledge. And so part of that, these guys were sent out all around France to observe and record all the techniques of the different crafts you can find in France. So it's a series of about 10 or 15 volumes, and you have the shoemaker, you've got the bread maker, carpenter, all crafts that you can think of, needle maker, really, and certain crafts are completely gone now, so it's a really good document. And it's quite interesting because some of these things look very familiar, and then other things we've totally lost touch with. Basic things like this, in fact. This is they call it a cable tail, it doesn't really exist in the dictionary, but it's a woven basket which you keep your linen thread, and it just stops it rolling around everywhere. And it's an incredibly practical sounding thing, so I'm looking to getting one for myself, actually. This is an English model. We've got it here, and then there's a few things. So obviously lasts. The lasts at the time were straight, they weren't paired up, it was two symmetrical lasts. You've got your pliers, lasting pliers, you've got your awls, and then you've got your paring knives. And as I mentioned to the other group, I had to read the text a couple of times because this seemed really confusing, but it really seems that it was the case. They would hold the handle under the armpit and then use the blade with your hand. And so you've got a men's one, which is longer, and a ladies' one. And it has this curve, which the modern French tranché still has, but it's just evolved over time. The English knife still has a handle, the French one doesn't. So yeah, these were a bit odd, but yeah, seemingly that's what they were using. Manacle, the awls, as I say, and then most of the finishing tools were really just wood and bone. And there's quite an interesting piece of information that goes with that, is that up until some time ago, a shoemaker's kit was called St. Hugh's Bones, and that's linked to the legends of St. Hugh, who's another patron saint of shoemakers, who we don't know who's less famous than Crispian and Crispianus. And essentially, he was a Welsh prince who goes out and he's taken on by German shoemakers, and then at some stage in his last sentence of death, and they collect his bones and make tools out of them. And they generally did use wood and tool and bone for their tools, so yeah, it has. Anyway, so this is the first document that we have for shoemaking. The next one is 10 years later, so this is again in the same optic, so Diderot and D'Alembert you probably have heard of, trying to do the same thing, compile all available knowledge, crafts, and the tools haven't changed much within 10 years. What's quite interesting about their So you've got the cobbler here working outside, as they usually would in sort of wooden shacks, and they were sort of the lower grade shoemakers relegated to the side of shops. And as part of their trade, they weren't allowed to handle new leather. They weren't allowed to handle cordable leather, new leather, unless it was for their own family. And if they were found doing so, you could get sent to prison or even killed.
Is that in France or?
That's in France, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it would have been the same case in England. I mean, it's part of the feudal system, really, of how the trade was organised. And so in big towns, you had your bootmaker, your gents maker, ladies, and then children's shoes. And that's important for tools as well, because tools were organised the same way. So the blacksmith would be making your lasting plies and your nippers. The bladesmith would be making your blades. The needle maker would be making your awls. And everything was organised in that way. So here's another plate from the same book. Much again the same. A few things before when we were using the lap steel iron, they were just using a wooden block. This is a bucket for your water, boar's bristles, all the kind of things that we're still using today, and some details of the plates here.
Can I ask the block with the holes in?
So that,
do you have?
yeah, it's to shake the sole. They used to shake the sole, so they would hammer it, and some shoemakers still do this nowadays.
We have one at the museum. We're going to do a talk later about our job at the museum.
Okay.
And the hole is so narrow.
Yeah,
So
it's
it
hard to
feels
understand.
so
Yeah.
Strange.
I know, it's confusing when you look at I mean, it's just with the knife, so I had to read it 2-3 times to make sure I understood it correctly because it seemed so odd. But that, yeah, they used to shake the sole in the...
So I'm thinking of trying to make a block like that because the one at the museum, I can't hit it with my hammer. So
But this is the thing,
that
at the time, the scale was completely different. Even if you look at last from the 20s, the foot is different. And, I mean, this would look like a giant's foot for them.
Oh, but I have lasts that are like 150 years old in big sizes.
Okay,
So,
but maybe there would be, I mean, I don't know, it's only theory, but for jack boots or much bigger constructions.
they're very similar.
Yeah.
We have a range of lasts from small to,
Yeah.
to big size.
But anyway, the book describes it as something for shaping the sole, so I can only trust them on that. And here we have the last maker as well in the same book. This is interesting because we don't get to see much. Again, the last processes of shaping the last, which is a little topic, but what's interesting is that they used to work seated using the block knife, which is quite interesting. And last makers actually had steel tools before shoemakers. This is quite interesting. They were using rasps, files, knives, in different grades. But they were already kind of fully kitted out. I mean, this is the same kit today for shoemakers. And this leads me on to the next thing. So this is 30 years later, and suddenly we've got a full catalogue of finishing irons, wheels, everything. So this becomes really exciting. And main reason this became about is the Industrial Revolution. Richard Timmins was in Birmingham. Steelworks, everything was booming. But how do we get there knowing that the trade is so regimented and so defined? And I only found out this recently when I was reading the history of Barnsley. First George Barnsley trains as a rasp and file maker. And then when you look at the old tools, you realise that some of them have got rasp and file grids on them. So pass this around to you. If you look carefully, you'll see remnants of the grids. And so they would have been recycling old files and making tools out of them, which makes a lot of sense. And so I think that's how it comes about. It was file and rasp makers that started making the shoemakers tools, because they would have had access to the steel. Obviously the blade makers would have still been making your knives, and the blacksmith making your hammers and your pliers and so forth. That, I think, is really how it develops.
And the driver, of course, is an old bastard file
Of course, yeah. And so even now, I mean, you still see like well beaters and things like that. It's just an old file bed. People were making tools out of what they had. So, but really quickly, you get into things which are really finely made. This is the nicest tool I own. And you've got the maker's mark here. The owners used to stamp them with the mark they used to apply on their sole. I think this is made with rosewood, and we don't use these nowadays, but this is a jigger, and so you would finish the edge of your sole, and then this is just to make that little groove on the edge of the. They would have been using, you see, because you don't have the double lip iron that we use nowadays. They would have had single lip only. And here you have the. So pass those around. There's another one here which is a little later, a bit rougher. And then another tool of the period is, so these are English and this is French. And this is it's called a fer piqûre, and it's to finish the heel angles. Here, working around. And again, I mean, the craftsmanship is really beautiful here.
What are those called?
These are called jiggers.
The jiggers.
Yeah, it's not a very attractive name, but and even the ferrule is worked and everything. It's just a lovely looking thing. And so at this stage you've got about 5 pages.
What is this one for?
It's for the heel angles.
That's what I thought. That's what I use it for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe even the top is fancy. It's just a detailing line essentially. So here's another page of the same catalogue, showing you some more things. So really, suddenly it's just exploded. You've got wheels, you've got gauges, you've got files. It's all here. So this would have been a 5-page catalogue, and then you move onwards to George Barnsley's 1898, and we've gone to 23 pages now. And even more choice. It just speaks for itself.
Will, do you have any of these original catalogues? Can you find any of
no.
those? Have you looked?
No, I've drawn the very early pages I will show you. Yes, that I do have the page. These ones, I'd love to see a copy of this. I'd really love to see this. But this is just a photocopy from the Leatherworkers Dictionary. I've got a reference to this book at the end.
Colin Barnsley has the 1898 one.
Does he? Yeah. So, I mean, this is just lovely to look at. And then we move on to French catalogues. This is 1920s and 40s, and it's just kept rising, and I think this is about 75 pages now. And you've got to a stage where you get these huge sets. You've got everything categorised, so men get a wire, double lip, and women get single lip. 5 different types of heel irons. I mean, these are just samples, 75 pages of tools like this. You've got this tool that's going around here. Yes, it's just all a bit too much almost. I mean, 6 types of hammers, pliers in all shapes and sizes, and generally this is just for show. Then you probably email them and then not email, but write a letter, and then they have even more stuff that you won't find in the catalogues.
Going back the other way to where we're chewing things with our teeth because we can't get tools.
Exactly, yeah. And so this is what's quite interesting. This is really the peak, and if you think about it, it's taken about 100 years. And in 100 years, I think it's fair to say shoemaking has got one of the most diverse and incredible variety of tools. I can't think of even carpentry or things which are just as old that have such a developed. And it just crashes suddenly. The French industry kept going until maybe the 40s or 50s, but the English makers, they just dropped like flies by 1910. Can't find anything after 1910. And I think it's because they were all being shipped out to war, basically. There's a few things coming into play. You've got the demand for boots in Northampton, which was supplying the English and the French army. So you're boosting industrialised trades. the bespoke shoemakers, which would have been travelling around the UK and in London, which would have been one-man bands mostly, or small businesses, would have been the guys that would have been sent out to war probably, and all likelihood the dates reflect that. And yeah, so for England you see three main centres. You've got the West End, which were making from the 1880s to 1910, so a sort of 30-year window. The guys was centred around Soho. There was a guy in Old Street in the East End of London, a couple of guys. A few in the West End in sort of Kensington area. He'd got the areas in London. And really they're making the fine tools. They're using, the handles are made out of walnut, they're made out of rosewood, exotic woods like ebony, lignum vitae, which is Jamaican wood, which is very dense. It's got about the same density as lead, so they call it leadwood, and it would be used to on ships and things like that. I mean, it's really quite developed stuff. And the irons are beautifully cut. I mean, they're finished very well, and they last very long. I'll pass this around after, but this one is, I use it daily. It's 140 years old.
Yeah.
So that was the West End. Then obviously you have before that Barnsley and Timmins, which were in Birmingham and Sheffield. They were sort of the founders of tool making in the UK. And then you've got Northampton, which developed a different style of tool making, still very good quality. The handles were probably using beech. The irons are a little bit chunkier, the lips tend to be a little bit heavier, but they're still really good quality tools, and they last long. And yeah, so Northampton lasts until maybe the 30s. Yeah, that's my theory for British tool makers. About 28 I can find so far. And then in France, it was really a lot larger. There's 3 pages worth of this. 75 names in total. Interestingly, you had Oliver, they were making all, and they were a French-British company, supplying both countries. And in France, it's a little bit different. You have some guys producing under their name and selling under their name, and then you have specialised, you have at least 2 specialised workshops that are supplying other people, so it just gives you an idea how big it was. And these were Egenschwiller, which is outside of Paris in Argenteuil. They were selling under their own name, but they were also supplying at least, I think it's about 5 or 6 different dealers. You had Dupuis, they were supplying Joucon. I've listed it here basically. And so you find the maker's name and the supplier's name. And I suspect that they were ordering to spec according to what they wanted to obtain. And the guys would be making it, and there's 2, so there's Egenschwiller and the other one's Garnier, who's working in that way as well. And obviously you had a big density of makers in Paris, but then you also had Lyon and Dijon, Renal were a really big, they were a really big supplier. And then you also had Martin and Tours, no that's another one, but anyway, most big cities had at least 1 shoemaking tool makers.
Does that mean you find more French tools, Will, than you do English historically?
Yeah, I guess there would be more. I mean, France is a slightly bigger country. Yeah, I guess you could say, yeah, there were more tools. And they lasted longer as well. The French tools are not as old as the English, but they lasted longer. I think they started probably around the 1880s, really, to become professional. And they lasted until probably the 50s, I would say. Whereas most of the English makers, they were the big ones, the big names like Richter, Barnsley obviously. There's a few big names that supplied a lot of the trade. The diversity that was in the West End came in and died out really quickly. Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to introduce to you before I move on is people making their own tools, which was a tradition which was surviving from the 18th century and before. So
I'd like to pass these around to you. You can just have a quick look and see. But yeah, guys were cutting their own kit and then supplanting that with professionally made tools. So all of these are handmade. This is a double iron. It was actually double, but yeah, one's fallen out. This was waste iron. This one's made in Sweden. I think that was English. Then you've got a burnisher. This is what was before an edge iron. That comes from Sweden as well. And making your own tools was really a really big part of shoemaking. I mean, it was integral. You had to know how to cut your own kit because, as today, it's very expensive, and not all shoemakers were making the kind of income to buy their tools.
Still that way.
Still that way. So that's why I'm giving you this talk. We need to get back to it, basically. Some trimmers. Then you've got some channel openers made from cutlery. A lot of stuff was made out of cutlery. Old knives, things like that. Trimmers, another iron, probably made from a file again. And it's really interesting how creative these guys were getting with what they could make. I mean, I find stuff, and some of them they're real treasures. This is an old knife, I think. It's got a lovely ebony handle, and I'm using it the way the previous owner was probably using it when I make a bevel waist to avoid touching the upper. Stick it between the yeah. So you do find some really, really lovely things. That's an edge trimmer. We use it that we use it in salary a lot, but you know if you've got a leaf on the sole or something, you just want to clean it up.
When I started my apprenticeship, Will, first thing I was told I had to go away and make a knife.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the.
They weren't even thinking about training me unless I could make a knife.
Exactly, yeah. And I think before that it would have been the knife and probably your whole kit, you know.
Yeah.
You would have had to make.
Go and make it
There are some books where they say, you know, if you're a good shoemaker, you can make a pair of shoes with a fork and knife. And he was pretty close, to be honest with you. Yes, so let's move on. And the other thing that changes over time is the steel production. And in the 19th century, they were using the Bessemer process all throughout the Industrial Revolution. And in very simple term, you're purifying the pig iron by blowing air into it. Heat it up, blow the air into it, and it clears all the impurities, and that produces your iron. And that is a method used up until about the 1930s, 40s, and then they shift to the Linz-Donawitz process. And when you use this process, you're shifting not from air to just oxygen, and you get a better quality steel. But the other reason they were doing this as well is they were pushed to do it because of use of nuclear bombs. When they started testing nuclear bombs, they released a lot of nuclear waste into the atmosphere. And if you're using pure air, it goes into your steel. If you're using oxygen, obviously you're purifying it. You'll still have some of that contamination, but it does affect the quality of the steel. And so these things modify the way steel is made, and it also changes the way you think about steel. So steel produced before the 30s, it's called low background steel, and after that, it doesn't have a particular name. The difference is that modern steel, all of it until now, still has nuclear contamination in it. It doesn't really affect us as shoemakers because we're not doing most of us are not doing high precision shoemaking. But it's worth knowing that the steel and the quality is made different, and what was made previously and the tools you see over there could not make that quality of steel anymore because it's contaminated. I'm not saying it's better or worse, I'm just saying it's different. I couldn't vouch for that because I don't have enough knowledge of steel, but it's worth mentioning. So here is an example of how tools would have been made in the 19th century. And this is a technique using swage or drop forging. There's still companies using this. This is a video of the Berger Blanchard workshop in Paris, who still make saddler's tools, and they supply Hermes with this technique. And I visited them to try and convince them to make shoemaking tools. And despite the enthusiasm, after about 6 months, the tools haven't moved from the drawer, so I sort of called it quits. But they still produce more or less how they would have done in the 19th century, which is quite interesting. So yeah, have a look and see if you can figure out what these guys are making. It's something you're all familiar with. And essentially the process is comparable to minting a coin. You have 2 pieces of a mold which you smash together on the steel like this, and it gives you your part. And the good thing about it is that at the end of the process, the piece of whatever you're making is a single piece which has been compressed into its shape, into a single loaf. So that has inherent qualities, obviously. Yeah. So you just get a rough part like that. And then obviously after that some hand finishing is involved. But it just allows you to have really, and I mean Blanchard in France are like the collectors, people ripping each other's heads off to get this because it's so beautiful. And even now, if I've had a hammer or two, and it's literally 3 pieces, it's the head, the handle, and it's a single nail holding it in, and the thing is 100 years old and it still looks beautiful. They're really, really lovely made. So this is the hand finishing process. And they do this for most of their tools, whatever they're making. This is a pricking iron for bag making. But it requires skilled craftsmen who understand the properties of what they're doing. The guy who runs the factory visits the workshop at Hermes regularly, and they have that conversation. And it's a really, really important part of tool making. It's a conversation between the maker and the user. And I've found so far that's the hardest thing. You need to have both components. You need to have someone who knows what they're doing, and they have to have the will to do it as well. And usually people have the knowledge, but it's not compatible. There needs to be a conversation.
Well, presumably with a hammer,
Yeah.
if you had the hammer,
Yeah.
you could effectively take a mould from it. Would be possible to do.
Yes, but there's more to it than that. You have to understand the properties of the steel that you need for the hammer.
Okay.
Say you're making, because they make hammers, for example, who are magnetised.
Okay.
So it'll have a certain amount of carbon at the head or at the back to pick up the nails, and the centre will be treated differently. And that's really key. So for shoemaking tools, you have to understand about what kind of say a fudge wheel, it needs to be really dense to warm up, and then keep the heat so that you've got 5 minutes to iron your shoe or fudge it or whatever. And these are really key things because you're going to be heating it for the entirety of its life and abusing it. And if you haven't got the right quality of steel, it'll just wear out. And it's usually what you find is that tools get pitted very quickly. The quality of the steel is not good. So here is a good example. I've got 3 tools made in different periods. So this one's made in the West End in the 1880s. This one's made in Sweden in the 1920s or about. And this one's made by Barnsley recently. This is recent. First thing you can notice is the handle. So these guys were using walnut, as I mentioned, with a brass ferrule. I just think it's very well thought about. The way it just falls into your hand, you can just explains itself to you. And then you've got a nice detail here. There's a very soft bevel here, and that's to prevent damaging the last when you're trimming the inside, which is quite clever. Which these two guys have obviously, that was forgotten. But, you know. The steel is quite hard as well, so you can use it to trim the holdfast, the inner channel with the holdfast. And the main thing obviously is this little corner here is wide enough to protect your thread, but you can get in close, so you can do a neat and clean job, and it's stamped nicely in the steel, so we still know who has made this. And again, the owners have stamped it with their name as well, because they're obviously treasured it. So have a look at that. Then we have the Swedish made one, so this is made in Eskilstuna, which is call it Sheffield, Sweden, Sheffield if you like. Again, beautifully worked handle, brass ferrule. We've lost the thickness, and I mean, it's true that Swedish tools tend to be flexible. The quality of the Swedish steel that's a quality, so maybe it's intended to do it that way. But you could still probably use it to shape the holdfast, but I wouldn't be so comfortable doing it, so it's lost one of the possible applications. But it's still very well made. I still use this one as well. It's stamped again, and you know, it's just a lovely looking thing as well, so working with this will be a pleasure. And here we still have, you know, a lot of good properties. The handle is now beech, and it's varnished. It's a bit of an industrial finish, so it's designed for heavier use, you know. It's still got a brass ferrule as well, which is nice. Some examples you just see steel now. But the blade is showing a few things that have been lost in conversation already. I think Barnsley, this is a recent photo, what they now do, instead of forging it, is take a sheet of steel and stamp it out. So it's robust, but you'd be scraping, you know, you'll last all day there, unless you adjust that, but you know, most people wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable doing that. And then as well, the stamping, you would want something in the steel. This, I think, would rub out after about 5 or 10 years work, and to their own detriment, you might not be able to say who made this anymore. And then the final thing is that you'd want to adjust the lip here. So really, the key thing is the conversation between the toolmaker and the shoemaker is something that has kind of fallen out. And it's easy to see why, because the West End toolmaker would have been 15 minutes away from the closest shoemaker, so you know, he can make it to spec, they can have a chat about it. Again, with Blanchard, you know, that's a key point of their business, is that they often visit the workshops. Over time, yeah, so I think that's one thing. People need to be clued up about what they're after and make it known to the supplier to obtain it, so that we can maintain the traditions and actually maintain also the use of the tool, because that has lost some of its application now compared to the original design of the tool.
I always assumed in the latter years of Barnsley that they were just giving you the rough thing to make.
Well, this is another thing. So you could argue, and it's impossible for us to say whether the old tools have already been finished by the previous 2-3 guys that have owned them.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But overall, it's my experience that they are finished in a very defined way, and I think they were really, yeah, of course there would have been some adjusting, but they would have been finished at a very high standard, I think.
And when you say recently, do you mean by, because there's a repetition turn parts or something? You know, like Barnsley's when they closed down.
Yeah.
Because the Sons,
Oh,
they sold the factory for money, didn't they? And then there was the cousins that have got all the tools, and you can still get it, I think, called repetition turn parts.
No, Barnsley, the company Barnsley has reopened.
Oh, has it?
Yeah. For the last year, I guess, year or two.
Yeah, it's got new owners.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Colin's retired.
Oh, yeah.
And two family friends took it over. So they were kind of working with him in the last few years.
Yeah.
And now
They're back in.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I'm going to move on to the second